Thank you, Bill. I was a little bit glad that Fred Smith didn't introduce me this morning. You know, after listening to him here in a couple of introductions, I'm sure glad he's not a sports writer. I tell you, he'd be hard to get along with. But it is a pleasure for me to be here this morning, I tell you. And, of course, all these awards I've been getting and all these nice things people have been saying about me, I just can't understand how the Dallas Cowboys, with such a brilliant coach, could have failed to score on the first down and 2 yards to go. I just can't. It's just amazing. Everybody asks me, you know, why didn't you run Perkins down there? Why did you pass so many times? How come Meredith rolled out? He says, they always come up and say, did you call the plays down there? And I told him, I said, well, I learned a lesson a long time ago about that. I had a good friend who was a high school coach in New Jersey. It was a very tough league while I was coaching in New York. And he told me a story about having a lot of success and coming up to the final game, the championship game that they had to win the league that they were in. And he happened to have a little quarterback. It was a third-string quarterback that, as he walks up and down, as you see all coaches do, and this little quarterback had never been in the game, and all the time he'd played for him, and he was right by his elbow going up and down. And every time he turned around, he'd run into him. This little kid was just hoping that he'd turn someday to him and send him in the ball game. In this game, things were pretty tough in this championship game. They were going down to the last minute of play, and all their timeouts were gone. They didn't have the ball. The other team had it deep in their own territory, running out the clock, and looked very hopeless. And all of a sudden they fumbled, and his team grabbed the ball in there, and he got so excited. He grabbed this little third-string quarterback, and he pulled him halfway out on the field, and he says, run 7 to the right and 6 to the left. And the little kid just ran out there, got his helmet on wrong, but he finally got it straight by the time he got to the huddle. And he got in the huddle, and he called 7 to the right and went for 8, and he called 6 to the left and went for 7. The ball was resting on the 2-inch line. Time for only one more play with no timeouts. And the little guy looked at the sideline and waited for the coach to send him the play, but nothing came. And he didn't know what to do, so he went back in the huddle, and he called a play and came out, broke the huddle, and got up the line and snapped the ball. And right before the coach's eyes unfolding was a double reverse. Well, of course, the coach, he almost had a heart attack. I'll tell you, but you know, to his surprise, the ball carrier went over untouched for the touchdown to win the game, and all bedlam broke loose. Well, he didn't want to say anything to the little quarterback about his call because of the excitement of winning the game. But next week he called him in and he said, Bill, he says, you know, we have a lot of good plays in our selection. I mean, we could have quarterback sneak, we could have wedged our fullback right and so on to make these 2 inches, but how come you ever came up with a double reverse on the goal line? And the little guy says, well, you told me to call 7 to the right, coach, and you told me to call 6 to the left, and I waited for you to call that third play, but you didn't call anything, so I just added 7 and 6 together and called 14, which is our double reverse. Well, of course, the coach was just taken back for a minute. He says, now, Bill, listen, 7 and 6 is not 13. It's not 14, it's 13. And old Bill looked up at him and says, you know, Coach, if I was as smart as you, we'd have lost that ball game. So I can assure you that I don't call any plays on the goal line. I turn it all over to Don Meredith. I figure he's smarter than I am when he's down there. But it is, gosh, it's a real pleasure for me to be here with you all today. This is my first Layman's Leadership Institute, and I've heard such wonderful speakers. It's just amazing. And having not gotten here till yesterday, I'm kind of afraid to tell any stories because I'm sure somebody must have told them before. But I think it's so appropriate. When I tell the story of the 2 cows that were out in the pasture and was looking at the highway there and watching this beautiful panel truck come by with real white, and on the side of it it had pure milk homogenized with vitamin D added. And one of these cows turned to the other cow and says, makes you feel a little inadequate, doesn't it? Well, I can tell you, I feel awful inadequate when I start talking about Jesus Christ. But the thing I've learned as a layman is that, you know, that old milk truck wouldn't be going to town if it wasn't for those 2 cows out in that pasture. And I don't believe that the gospel of Jesus Christ would move forward if it wasn't for people like you and I who were willing to stand up and say what they felt about our relationship to him. And I can assure you I'm not a pro in this field. I'm a real amateur. But it is a pleasure for me to be here. I was raised in the town of Mission, Texas, which is a very small town in southern Texas, about 6,000 people. I went to church every Sunday like most of y'all did, and I had a wonderful Christian family. But you know, the amazing thing as I look back on my life, when I went to church, I was very uncomfortable. I got into church and I was squirming. I wanted to get out when I was a youngster, to get out and play football and do the other things that kids like to do. And I didn't really understand why this was until later on in life. But I was reading just recently a question that was sent in to Dr. Graham in the paper. Many of you probably read it. And this person said that, a young person said, I want to be a Christian, but when I go to church, I'm just not happy. I don't get anything out of it. I want to get out. I just don't enjoy it. And I thought Dr. Graham's answer was so wonderful. He said, in effect, that church is not like watching an athletic contest, watching a football game. When you go to a football game, you got to know something about the game. You got to know how it's played. You got to recognize the players by the numbers in there to enjoy it. And this is so true. And I think when we go to church that we have to really, in order to enjoy it, we've got to know who Abraham, Jacob, and all the rest were. We've got to know what the gospel's all about. And this, of course, is the reason I didn't enjoy it when I was a kid. Someone said that our religion is what our total response is, what we consider most valuable in life. And we got a real lecture on this last night from George Schweitzer. But this was me. This was my life when I was a youngster. Football was my life. Everything that I did when I was a young kid was around football. I thought, but even in those days, I had a very restless feeling inside of me that I wanted to accomplish something. I never realized what it was, but it was just a feeling that I wanted to do something. Something was urging me on to do something, but I didn't really know what it was. I thought, well, it must be football, that I wanted to accomplish something great in football. And at that level, in that small town of Mission, Texas, I thought, if I could just have a championship team, be a part of a championship team, and be an all-district halfback, that I'd have everything that I wanted. Well, we did. My senior year in high school, we won everything. We were only scored on one time, and I was an all-district halfback. And I thought for just a moment that I'd found the answer to what life is all about, because I felt really elated, and I was pretty proud of old Tom Landry during that time. But it was surprising how quick that this wore off. And I found myself having to set another goal, and I wanted to go to college to play football. And I went to the University of Texas, which was a fine institution. From a small town, this is a big step. And I thought if I could just become a football player with the University of Texas, if I could just accomplish some things there, I would have everything that I wanted out of life. And we did. We went to Sugar Bowl, we went to the Orange Bowl. We played a lot of great football at the University of Texas. But this still wasn't enough. And I went on into professional football. And I thought that this must be it, because this was the height of a football player's ambition. So I went into professional football, and I started setting the same goals to try to rest this restlessness that I felt. And I wanted to be an all-pro, which I was fortunate enough to be. And I wanted to play in the Pro Bowl game, which I was fortunate enough to coach here last week. And I wanted to have a championship team in New York, which we did in 1956. But everything and every accomplishment left me the same way after the enthusiasm and the happiness and everything that goes with success. And I returned after what was considered, I guess, the greatest game ever played in 1958 when we played Baltimore for the championship in the first overtime game they ever played. And I returned to Dallas, and a friend of mine who talked to me one day, and he says, Tom, how about joining me in a Bible discussion group that we have that's meeting over here at the hotel? And there's some members right here in the audience that were in this group. And I said to myself right there, man, you got to be crazy. I mean, I've been going to church all my life. I know all the Christmas stories and everything else that goes with this thing, and I have a pretty good conscience. Heck, I know right from wrong. I thought I was a pretty good fella. But since he was a real good friend, I said, well, yes, I'll go with you. And so I did go. And fortunately for me, I think that we happened to be in Matthew at the time in this particular discussion group. And when I started picking up this Bible that Mr. Packer talked about so well this morning, and I started reading it, and I said, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you shall eat or what you shall drink, nor about your body, what you shall put on. Is not life more than food, and body more than clothing? And I went on to read, therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Let the day's own trouble be sufficient for the day. Ask and it will be given, seek and you shall find, knock and the door will be open. Well, for the first time in my life, here's a book that's been at my elbow for 33 years. And that's where it was in those 33 years, was at my elbow. I hadn't really opened it to look inside of it before. And for the first time, I looked in and see what it was all about. And my life has to start changing right at that moment. It was just amazing, the feeling that I got as I read. And I continued to read. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house upon a rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon the house, but it did not fall, because it was founded on a rock. Well, this changed my life right here. For the first time, I realized there's a difference between a churchgoer and a Christian, and I never knew that before. I've really found for the first time what Jesus meant when he said he came, that we may have life more abundant. And the thing that I think surprised me more than anything else was that my ambitions really didn't change. That I still wanted to be the best coach in America. I wanted the Dallas Cowboys to be the best football team in the world. This didn't change at all, but the way I looked at people did change. I started looking outside of myself and enjoying people for the first time. And it gave me a new feeling. And surprisingly, as you might expect, that restless feeling left me at this time. St. Augustine said that thou hast made us for thyself, O God, and hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. Well, I discovered that at age 33. And you know, the most disappointing thing in my life, I believe, was that I waited till I was 33 years old before I discovered the fellowship of Jesus Christ. Because I just think back how much more wonderful my life would have been in every stage. It wouldn't have changed probably what I am today as far as a football coach or a football player, but I think it would have changed my relationship with every person that I came across through my life. And to me, I know that Joe Blinko talked this morning about challenging Christians to fulfill something. And I know that he said this morning that you really don't challenge people to become Christians. Well, of course, I'm in a field of challenging. I challenge people all the time. And I believe you have to challenge people. And I think one of the biggest problems in our church today is that we're not challenging our young people to follow Christ. And this, of course, is my greatest interest today, because I deal with young people all the time. I know we adults have stayed around long enough that through disappointment, heartache, unhappiness, that we've been forced to seek out God. But it's a wonderful thing when Jesus wrote, "To seek and you shall find." Because this word seek is a two-way street. Because when God seeks man, it's a manifestation of his grace. I mean, it's an expression of his love for you and I. But when man seeks God in there, it's a confession that he's helpless without him. The unfortunate thing today in our society, I believe, is that the majority of our young people are not seeking God as a father because they don't feel their helplessness without him. I mean, our generation today is really cushioned with an unprecedented, affluent, and welfare state. I mean, our youngsters today have a feeling of economic security that's unmatched in history. And so they don't feel the need from that reason to seek out God. But I tell you, they're a wonderful group of people. If you deal with them, you know them. They're better prepared, they're more assertive, they're more intelligent, they're more worldly than, gosh, any generation that ever came before us. And they're really seeking a purpose for their lives in there. At the same time, they're looking for where the action is. And they're easily swayed into alcohol, into sex, and into vandalism. But I'll tell you this, they're not looking for religion to solve their problems, but they want to look to it. They want to look towards religion to solve it, and yet we're failing them to do it. And that's why I'm so interested in the Fellowship of Christian Athletes as an organization that is confronting coaches and athletes, and through them the youth of a nation, to the challenge and adventure of following Christ in the fellowship of the church. Gosh, when I see fellows like Paul Anderson, who is our Olympic champion weightlifter, stand up in front of a group of kids and take a 20-penny nail and drive it through two 1x6s with his bare hands in front of these kids, and then bring up about 8 of them up on the stage and get on a table and get underneath it and lift this table off of the stage, and then walk up the microphone and tell these kids it takes courage to be a Christian. It's no sissy's game. Well, boy, it makes an impression on these boys. And I think that this is just one avenue. I think we have in this group right here people with vision. And there's many avenues for people with vision. For Jesus said that you are the light of the world, and a city placed upon a mountain cannot be hid. And neither does a man put a lamp under a bushel basket, but he puts it up on a stand so everyone in the house can see it. I mean, this is you and I. I mean, we're the light of the world as far as Jesus Christ is concerned. And we have an obligation to go forth and use our influence. And we must use it in the youth of America and try to change their way. For God so loved this world that he gave his only begotten Son. He put him on a cross to die for you and me. And if God would give so much for us, it seems the least that we could do would be to live the type of life that would encourage young people to follow him who came, that we may have life more abundant. Thank you very much.